We've been having some wonderful discussions over the past couple of weeks, and we are happy to be with you once again. We've got with us again Dr. Henry. Dr. Henry is
All right.
pastoring in well, go ahead and I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves
All right.
for us tonight. Go ahead, starting with Dr. Henry.
All right. Dion Henry from Kansas City, Missouri, in the Central States Conference, pastoring in a wonderful church, the Beacon Light Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I'm just happy to be a part of the ministry.
Amen. Right next to him, across the bottom of your screen, in that nice lime green shirt, hailing from the beautiful island of Trinidad, we've got.
You got Pastor Roger Wade. Wish I was in the island of Trinidad right now, but I am here in the United States under well, they're under lockdown too, but I am here electronically connecting with my colleagues, and I'm just excited on this Sabbath day to be with you all once again.
All right. And then next to him, also hailing with some origins in that area of the world, in Trinidad, we've got Dr. Patrick Vincent. Doc, tell us a little bit about you and your what you're doing now, what you have done.
Well, I am a compatriot of Dr. Wade, and I'm retired out of the Southeastern Conference. 45 years into ministry, and I started a new self-supporting ministry now, Church Growth Plus Ministries, and I serve churches that have plateaued or are in decline as it relates to growth. And my goal is to try to get the churches growing again.
All right. That is absolutely a gargantuan task and a worthy one as well. I am Pastor C.A. Paul. I have the wonderful privilege and opportunity of pastoring the great New Hope Seventh-day Adventist Church here in the heart of beautiful South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I'm just hanging out with my friends here, and we hope that, again, some of these discussions that it might be edifying to the church. And then we have with us, joining us for the first time today as well, Brother Dorshe, Duane Dorshe, coming to us from the what do we call it? DMV. The DMV.
The DM.
Duane,
There
tell
you
us a
go.
little bit about yourself, your background, and what
Yes,
you're
sir.
doing these days.
Yes, good afternoon. Again, Duane Dorshe. I'm a member of the Seabrook Seventh-day Adventist Church in Seabrook, Maryland, Lanham, Maryland, under the pastoral leadership of Damian Johnson and Jimmy Munoz. And I do a couple things here at the church. I chair the finance committee, so I'm particularly interested in how we move forward as a church with our finances. And then secondly, I'm involved in the AV ministry as well. So the whole shift to online worship, the online experience, has been very important to us, and how we can take advantage of this new technology to help further our mission.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Henry, tell us just a little bit, give us some background of what we've discussed so far and where we're headed today. And then we're going to have a word of prayer with everybody as we begin today's roundtable discussion.
All right. All right. Well, we started this journey probably about three or 4 weeks ago. And, being in this season where everything is virtual almost, we're doing church online, and we recognize that it has created some challenges and some opportunities. We just started to think a little bit about the church and about where we're going as a church. And so we felt like we could, get some people on the line just to talk about the church, the structure, the ministry, how can we be effective? And so we were blessed to have Pastor Roger Wade gave us some great insight from a union level on the church and how the church can be effective. And then today, we just brought in some more people. Pastor Vincent, his legacy and what he has done actually for the denomination is just unsurmountable. I mean, just done a lot of great work, and he's a forward thinker. So we brought him in there, and you came on too, and you're giving us a great perspective as well. And so again, we're talking about how can we be effective? do we need to reevaluate some things that we're doing in the church, whether it's ministry, whether it is the structure? What can we do to be effective in 2020 onward? We see that changes have already begun to happen, not just in the secular society, but also in the church. And we brought up last week, like the General Conference. The General Conference, they changed the day until next year, May. Now they're limiting the amount of people. Only the delegates and their families, based on my understanding, will be able to go. And so that's a big shift. Vendors and that sort of thing, so it's a big shift. And from my understanding, they're also in our denomination, as people retire, some of the positions won't be filled, right? And so just taking a look at that and seeing if there are other things within our denomination or within our churches that need to be addressed so that we can continue to be effective.
All right. So that's what we're looking at. How do we be effective in a COVID-19 world? So there are some very important questions that we got to ask about that. But just before we begin today's discussion, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer and invite the presence of the Lord to be with us and our listeners as we move forward. Father, we're asking for your wisdom and for your guidance as we discuss some things that are going to affect all of us, or that are already affecting all of us right now. We ask that the Holy Spirit be our guide now, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, I've got some listeners there that have said that they could not hear my mic very well.
All right.
I'm hoping that you can hear me a little bit better now. Is that a little better, guys? I see Courtney Thomas mentioned that the mic was low. Arnell Polo mentioned that was a little low. Please give me a thumbs up or let me know if you're hearing me just a little bit better now. All right. So, Dr. Vincent.
Yes, sir.
Let's start with you. So, when this thing hit, and you heard that whole conferences were shutting churches down all over North America, what was the first thing that went through your mind when you heard that news, when the things were going on, or when we were getting shut down? You knew people weren't going to be in buildings. You knew tithe and offering plates, envelopes weren't going to be passed around. What went through your mind?
Well, I thought immediately that this might be a wake-up call for not only our churches, but the denomination in general. And I don't know whether or not we are in a position to learn the lessons that can be gleaned from what the Lord has permitted to happen through COVID-19. I think that if we can extrapolate all of the lessons that potentially we can learn, then we will emerge from this as a stronger denomination.
Okay, so there's going to be some lessons. I'm watching some of our comments here as well, and we're getting some comments, guys, that there's lots of hissing. So let's try this. When we're not talking, let's go ahead and mute ourselves on the Skype end, and that will mute it through the stream. So if we're not the ones who are talking at the moment directly, then let's go ahead and make sure that we are muted, and that might get rid of some of that hiss. All right. Okay. Duane, same question to you. When you found out that everything was getting ready to be closed down, and that for the unforeseeable future, even that we don't know how long this thing is going to be, what went through your mind?
Well, a couple of things. Like I said, I wear a couple hats at the church. One is the finance hat. The other is the media hat. The easiest part for us was the media side. We've been streaming for the past several years now. And within the past year, streaming to Facebook and YouTube, as well as Ustream. So we kind of had that technology in place, so we really didn't miss a beat. And I really applaud our board for investing in the technology that we needed, a year and a half, 2 years ago, so that we didn't miss a beat when this thing hit. So from that perspective, it wasn't that difficult for us to continue. The more challenging question is around the finances. Obviously, we anticipated a reduction in our income, the giving from our members as they were affected by this pandemic, and we took the immediate action to basically just cut our expenses in half. We literally cut our local expenses in half, and that has served us very well. The challenge with that I'm finding now, though, is that do we continue to appeal to our members to give to the church when there's so many other needs that exist both within our church and within the community around us? And what we've decided to do to address that is to really not make those direct appeals necessarily for contributions to the church itself, but to our emergency fund so that we can help our neighbors as they go through this crisis, as well as the other church members that are in need as well.
Okay, Duane, so I gotta throw this in there because I seem to have heard somewhere along the way some time ago, Seabrook is a church that brings in about 7 figures worth of tithe, if I remember correctly. Am I right in that?
You are correct. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So apart from, I've never pastored a church. There's a lot of our listeners who have never attended a church or been members of a church that had that kind of income. So when we hear you say that we cut our spending in half in order to be able to survive what was happening, there's not a whole lot of us. Where I'm pastoring right now, if I cut my spending in half, I don't have a building anymore. I don't have electricity. I don't have water. I don't have power. There's a whole lot of stuff I just don't have. So I'm not in that kind of a position to be able to just say I'm cutting my spending in half, because we weren't spending but almost for some bare necessities to begin with. Pastor Vincent, you have pastored churches, I'm sure, that have varied in size over the tenure of your pastorate.
Yes, sir.
How are local churches? How would churches that are not a Seabrook, that don't have that kind of a money, how would they navigate things like this? Should they be looking for, should we be asking the conference for a stimulus check? There's a union man there. Should we ask the union for a stimulus check? The NAD, what kind of, from a standpoint of resources been able to make it through, what are some of the things that local churches should be considering right now?
Well, I think that they would have to mimic what he just said on a smaller scale. And the Finance Committee would have to review the budget and cut out everything that is fat or expendable. For example, and Slim, I heard that this past Thursday week that the conference committee had met and they voted to approve the request of Mount Calvary and Patmos to go to just interest only on their mortgage payment.
Okay.
And that was designed to free up some additional dollars for the operational expenses of the church. So the Finance Committee will have to meet and discuss creative ways by which the budget might be reduced to a bare bones operation just to thrive and to survive in this season. I like to believe that is what they did at Seabrook.
Absolutely, Vincent. That was the first thing we did, because that is definitely our biggest single expense. So yes, that was the first thing we did, was appeal to the conference and the union to either defer our loan payments for a couple of months or allow us to pay interest only.
Right, because that's the largest single expenditure to a church that has a mortgage. Yes. Now, those that do not have a mortgage, it's much easier for them to thrive and survive by basically cutting back on certain ministries and departmental allocations and to freeze the actual budget until the storm is past.
Okay, Elder Wade, let me pause and bring you in here, because I suspect that there are some listeners right now who some of them may have checked out, because they're saying this is Sabbath. We're talking about mortgages and we're not talking about ministry. We're talking about finances and resources. How do we connect? Is there a connection between what we're talking about right now in terms of resources that are coming into the local church tithe and offering? Is there a connection to ministry, which I think most of our listeners, they're concerned about those kind of things. How would you connect those things, those two items, ministry and money?
Well, I would say this is a mantra we share. It costs to do ministry. Ministry doesn't happen in a vacuum. Ministry doesn't happen without dollars behind it. Even if it's human resources, there is still money that gets into that. Whether it's the resource of the material, whether it's the resource of the printing. Just to make the copies at the local church in the local church office is money. And so yes, there is a sense where the member begins to think, I give the money, so it must get done. But in reality, if in times like these, when people are defining whether or deciding, do I eat? The money that gets the business done in the local community is the offering. And so I'm able to give my tithe because I'm not touching that. But how do I now give the offering? How do I give the offering? Or if in some cases, I don't have a job, so I don't even have the money for tithe. And so what do I do? But I still need to eat. So I go to my church, but the resources they're using is money, is based on money. So we can't hide from it. We can't despiritualize it. It is a reality of what we're facing.
Okay.
I had a question just for our panel. So we know that in the time of crisis, we operate on a skinny budget, right? Mm-hmm. Just the essentials. We have to make adjustments. My question is, when things get back to the time of plentiful, okay, and we pray that, we'll have a time of plentiful, do we continue with the same allocation of funds that we have been doing before the time of crisis? Or are we saying, you know what, there might be some things that we can do differently so that we can effectively manage our resources and be ready to do optimal ministries? I'm interested to hear that, because what I don't want in this time, and I think last week, or I think 2 weeks ago, we had a comment that came on, I think it came on your page. And the comment was that, when this thing passes, we're praying it passes, people will go back to what they were doing before. Okay? And they mentioned, I think, some other thing that happened in history. I don't know if it was the H1N1 or another, something like that. But they said they'll go back to doing what they've done before. And I'm suggesting that this might, as you said, Dr. Vincent, this might be a wake-up call for us to reevaluate. And how do we become effective if we get the times of plentiful, like, the Bible talks about when it was a plentiful, Joseph, collected the stuff. So I'm just saying, how can we move from this and think about how do we manage our resources in a more effective way? Or the panel may be saying, or you may be saying, we are managing our resources effectively. But that's what I want to throw out to the community or to the panel.
Well, great question, Dr. Henry. And I think this time has forced us to take advantage of the digital technology that's there. I know a lot of our biggest expenses, aside from the mortgage, are, as you mentioned, our copier expenses, right? Leasing copiers to print bulletins and other materials. Well, how are we communicating with our members now when we're not at the church and we're not printing copies? So we've had to rely on the newer methods, the digital methods of communication. And why can't we just stick with that and reduce or eliminate the expenses that we have for copiers and printing and bulletins? Another big expense for us is Sabbath school materials, right? Quarterlies and the other materials for Sabbath school classes. That's a big part of our budget. We're pushing people to digital content now, digital Sabbath school lessons. So I think there are definitely lessons that we are learning from this time that we can apply to the time of plenty when it returns, so that we can use our money more effectively to reach the intended audience.
I like that.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. In relationship to what Dr. Henry was asking, even if and when additional funds are identified that can be reallocated, we must reallocate those funds with intentionality into ministry that is directly connected to our communities. Because where our churches have been remiss is that we have been absent of ministry in our communities. Everything that we do is by us, for us, unto us.
Wow.
And we don't see a benefit.
The connection.
He's on point. He's on point. I applaud the fact that, Duane, you pointed out the point that even now, when you're not using your copiers, what happens when you come back? You can begin to say, "Hey, this may not really be a place where I need to spend $300 a month, and maybe we can go back to maybe getting a smaller copier and start doing more digital content." It may mean hiring digital content creators like our young adults in our church.
Okay, yes.
It may not mean that we will spend less, but we'll just have to prioritize where we're going to put our funding, so that we begin to utilize the new channels of communications that we had to do. This morning, I had to preach a message to the senior population of a particular church, because the senior population can't get on the live stream. So they rather get on the phone. G.E. Patterson used to sing the song, "Jesus is on the main line." So they the party line is the way they remember it. And so that's how they do church now, an hour before the live stream. So the question would be, what dollars do we need to put into that to take care of that population? What dollars we need to put in to take care of the young adult population? What dollars we need to put in to take care of our children population? Children's church. We think it's only the 11 o'clock service where everybody is, but each of our generations are in need of a very specific ministry. And now we have to look at how we utilize the dollars instead of spending. I was at one church, and over $30,000 was spent on the musician. Now the musician is not coming to the church. Obviously, that's saving some dollars. So what do I do with those dollars? I have to reallocate it, and I have to look at how I can do it in the generations that I'm ministering to.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Duane.
It's such a great point. One of my frustrations is the fact that we at Seabrook have traditionally spent 75 to 80% of our local budget on maintaining the buildings, right? And this is what drew me to your conversation, Pastor Paul, a few weeks ago. And we don't have enough money to support the real mission of the church, which is to reach our community, as Dr. Vincent was saying. So, finding ways to trim out some of that fat that we can reallocate to what really matters is really a passion of mine. I know we've been very intentional about that at Seabrook and have made some significant strides in that way. But still, as we can find ways to take money out of supporting the building and the infrastructure that we use so little to really support the ministries that really make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of hanging out here for just a quick minute, because some may have not caught that original discussion, and that is the concern that if you look at almost any church's local budget, you're spending, when you count what you're paying for rent, what you're paying for mortgage, what you're paying the janitor for janitorial supplies, what you're paying on insurance, what you're paying for security, what you're paying for lawn care, all of those things, when you throw all of them in the bucket, you realize that you are spending the majority of your budget, of your local income, on the building. Now, if you take an average church in North America, and now I don't have real data for this, this is just, I'm guessing, so take that for what that is. But when I kind of measure up the time that we spend in the building, if you've got Sabbath school, divine worship, AY, you've got a Sunday morning Pathfinders, maybe a board meeting once a month, a business meeting once a quarter, maybe you've got a community service that's open once a week for about 3 to 4 hours. You take those things alone and you add them up, even throw in an hour's worth of social on a Saturday night. Then even with those things, you're using the building for less than 40 hours, not a week, but a month. 40 hours a month. And most of us are worshiping in close to $1 million buildings or multi-million dollar buildings. And when you look at that context and you're saying, we're spending all of that money on this, on these things, and think of it this way. It looks like we're getting Pastor Vincent back in. All right. Yes, he's coming in. Glad to have you back, Elder.
Yes.
You're almost there.
Yeah.
We got your audio. We don't have your video quite yet. All right. Well, as he goes, let me wrap that up. So when you look at the context of what we spend on our buildings that we use so little of, if I can make it even more poignant. If you were to build a church right now for 350 people in South Florida, you would be looking at a cost, if you just did a normal building layout where you've got a sanctuary that will seat 350, you've got a fellowship hall you're going to build for maybe about 250, then you've got some classrooms around there that you're going to use for some Sabbath school rooms. The reality is, Dr. Henry, that the majority, that building is going to cost you about $3 to $4 million in South Florida right now. The majority of that $3 to $4 million is going to go into which part of that building? The sanctuary, right? Because that's the biggest part. That's the largest part of the building. That's where your sound system, audio system is going to be. That's where the majority of your furniture, all those things, it's going to be in the sanctuary. But of those 40 hours that we use the building per month, how many of those 40 hours do we need to use that sanctuary? Most of us, the only time we need to use it, where we have to use it, is between 11 and 2 or 11 and 1, right? Because Sabbath school crowds generally can fit in some of that auxiliary space. AY crowds can fit in auxiliary space. Prayer meeting crowds can fit in the pastor's office, generally speaking. That's the reality is that we're pouring the majority of our money into the part of the building that we use the least. And then we're going to say, here's this $4 million project, $3 million, $4 million project. We're going to say we're going a fundraising project. And so when Pathfinders comes, Roger, and they want to raise money to go on this, we're going to say, hold on. You need to wait to raise for that because we're in a building fund project right now. So we're going to say, hold off on ministry till we can get into this building. And so we're going to come up with that $2 million. We want that $2 million in cash right up front so that we can put that down or whatever that is. And then we're in a 30-year mortgage. So for the next 30 years, we put ministry on hold to a greater or lesser degree while we're trying to pay for the building that we're still only using. And the ministries, community service, women's ministry, men's ministry, youth ministries, all of those ministries suffer when it comes to resources at the expense of the building. And right now we're coming to a point where we're realizing that in the pastor's office, Maurice Allen says, well, stop it. We're realizing now that we're seeing larger numbers attending our meetings, our worship services, and we're not even in the building. So there's a whole lot of things I think that we've got to process and we've got to consider along the way if we're saying we need to have more resources to do ministry. Now, there's a lot I left unsaid, but I need to let everybody back in. And glad to see Dr. Vincent is back with us here.
Yes. Pastor Vincent, I was going to say, Pastor Paul, Pastor Vincent, I want you to shed some light on that. And I know you were finishing up something that you got disconnected or the connection was bad. But shed some light on that because, again, we're talking about, reevaluating, looking at what's effective. And you've, been a pastor, you've evangelized, baptized many, hundreds of people. You built buildings and so forth. What do you think about that? Because do we put too much money into the building? Is that, or and I'm not saying you're saying this, Pastor Paul, but just for, we're evaluating everything. Everything's on the table. Are we putting so much money into edifices?
Let me clarify.
How are we doing that?
That it's not. I'm not. The point that I'm making is not that we're putting too much money into the building. The point that I'm making is we're putting too little use into the building.
Okay. But again, are we putting, or are some churches putting more emphasis on and not on the ministry of the building, or what the building can produce? What can this building? How can it minister to the people on Tuesday and Wednesday and Friday? So and go ahead, Pastor Vincent. I know you were mentioning something earlier that I definitely wanted to get that part.
Well, in relationship to what Anselm was saying, the first thing that we have to address is resources. As it relates to the building, understand that to a large degree, a community judges a church by its building. If you are a resident in a community and people drive by your building and they see a little old raggedy building that represents you, that's your statement as to who you are. So in order to raise your profile in the community, you have to first of all raise the optics, and it begins with the building. Now, to a large degree, a lot of the problems that we have relating to buildings in our churches is relating to the structural issues that we have in our church that need to be changed. Typically, what happens is we claim that we are the head and not the tail. But in a lot of instances, what we do is we go behind these other denominations and we buy up their old little raggedy buildings and we give them seed money to go into another part of town and build a nice, brand new, beautiful building. A lot of our churches can't build more attractive houses of worship because the funds that are available are so restricted. And that's a systemic evil that will not be changed until the system is changed. And it was designed by that to have a measure of control over the churches and over the constituents, because when the framers of the Adventist Church organized, they had a certain paranoia about people breaking away and becoming independent and starting their own movements, that they set everything up to protect that. All right, so let me give you a case in point as it relates to Southeastern right now. The conference, and this is not just typical of our conference, this is typical of every conference. When a church borrows money, technically, the church does not borrow the money. The conference does. And the church pays the mortgage. But when the conference is maxed out in terms of its capacity to borrow, then it shuts down building in a conference until the conference becomes solvent. I don't know if you follow me or not, because the policy says that a conference can only borrow up to 4 times as much as its tithe income. So when it exceeds that, then the churches are not able to borrow any money, and then a moratorium is declared. So everybody has to stand in line and wait until the moratorium is lifted. Now, if every church was able to borrow money based upon its own financial strength, then that would be different. But we can't do that. Why? Because it's against the policy. And the policy then works against the church, and so that can never be changed. Now, I'm only addressing the issue of the mortgage now, but then get into the other issues associated with ministry, which is when the largest stream of income goes into the conference, which is the tithe, and the mortgage is paid, the church is left with nothing, zero, zilch, to do ministry in the local community. Now, what I've done successfully over the years in order to build buildings is to move away from the system as we know it to the community, and to raise funds in the community to support the church. And any pastor who wants to generate his own funds can do it if he knew how to do it from the community in terms of building schools, building churches, and the clinic that we started here locally. But if you depend on the system for the money within the system to do it, it will not be done.
I believe that there is a biblical model. I haven't been in pastoral ministry as long as Pastor Vincent has, and I haven't had as many opportunities to grow churches as he has. But I know there's a biblical model that shows that when the people all work together, and that's the members, God can do great things. And I think a lot of our churches have lost faith. I'm not saying that is the answer, but it does help when you provide a membership with the sense that they are locked in shoulder to shoulder with God, making a difference in their local community. Man, the purse strings do open up. Opportunities come, monies fall into your, but I should say monies, opportunity falls into your lap, because the community will say, hey, we're willing to do this for you. And that gets you into doing ministry. So some of the things that I have done at my last pastorate was literally walk the community. talk to the people, connect with the businesses and the agencies that are in the community, and as you start doing those things, opportunities opened up. One of the organizations within my community, they fundraise monies to give back to local school members, students. We had a school at our church. All they asked for was to utilize the fellowship hall to do their scholarship banquet. I said, sure, we'll do that. And I looked at some community service dollars and bought some Martinellis for them to give to the students at that event. And because of our partnering with them, they then said, hey, because you have a school, we will fundraise to give funding to some of your school students. So that opens up a scholarship opportunity for the school there in the local church. So what I'm saying is that once we start doing ministry in the community, monies will pop up from places you never knew that was there to continue doing ministries. And that's utilizing the building, that's utilizing ministry, and that's going into places that you have never been, where funding can be seen, and we're not dependent on the system's dollars to make things happen. So there are ways to do it.
Wow. That's huge.
I can't hear you, Pastor Paul. I can't hear you.
All right.
Okay,
a little bit better.
Are you hearing me? I'm not hearing Pastor Paul. I didn't want to speak unless I was recognized.
Okay.
Go ahead, Doc. You got it.
No, I was saying that what Pastor Wade says is right on point. The problem and the challenge is that our membership needs to be educated so that they understand that when we stand in the judgment, God is not going to ask us how much tithe we pay, how well we supported this denomination, how well we supported the campground, how many mortgages you paid. The question is going to be, did you do it to the least of these my children? And that's where the least of our emphasis is. The average Seventh-day Adventist church now opens up at 8 o'clock on Sabbath. It shuts down at 1:30 or 2. They open up, I'm talking about in normal times, they open up for an hour on Wednesday night. They shut down. People drive by all week. They see a closed building. There's nothing, absolutely nothing going on around the church, in the church, or in our community, unless it's a funeral, or they may have a departmental meeting sometime on a Sunday morning. There's no program for the homeless, no program for drug addicts, no programs like what we started in Tampa with a free healthcare, a clinic for people who cannot afford assurance, and we are disconnected from our communities. And that's why a lot of our churches now are drying up in terms of membership, because even as Ellen White says, before you can get people to believe in your message, you have got to first, Christ's method alone. You have to go and meet people's needs where they are.
Hey, so let that be written, and so let that be done. That's absolutely on point, and I agree with that 1,000%. That's one of those things. I want to make sure that we are not. We've got a lot of people who are adding comments and whatnot in our feed, and I want to make sure that we're not overlooking some of the comments and some of the questions. I want to back up here. Dr. Vincent, I saw a comment from Don L. And I think he started somewhere else. Exactly. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Exactly. Restructuring is necessary from the top down. And then he moves to must create it using health ministries such as gyms, cooking. I guess that means cooking classes. You could be independent from the organization to do true community service, social work, education, childcare. You have to be in touch with your community to be the Good Samaritan. That's just and then John Boston's comment. Our most successful fundraising pastors, let me put that on the screen for you guys. Our most successful fundraising pastors engage in compassion and proclamation. They don't lose sight of one for the benefit of the other. Great insights, great comments there. I think that if we were to kind of synthesize some of the things that have been said, I would not want anyone to walk away from this discussion with the idea that any of us don't believe in church buildings. I think for the most part, all of us believe that there is value in the concept of having a corporate place of worship. However, I think at least what I was driving at, and what I've heard from some of the other comments, is that a corporate place of worship ought to also be, and the resources that we put to it should also be corporate places of ministry that extend beyond the worship hours. And if we could do that, I would much rather, and I might be all by myself on this one, but I would much rather build a $30 million community service center than I would a $7 million that's going to be open 6-7 days a week than I would a $7 million worship center that's only going to be used for worship for a few hours on the weekend. I mean, that to me, I think I'd much rather do that. I can find a place in that $40 million building to have worship. But if I'm meeting the needs of the people of my community in that space during that time, I don't really care how much the building cost. It's the value that we're getting out of it that becomes a problem, or the focus. I want to circle back, if I can, gentlemen.
But before you circle back, Anson, I do need to say, it was said here, I saw it also on the feed, the higher organization is actually putting their money where their mouth is. We have, I'm at the union level. This past November, the North American Division voted an increased salary for pastors and workers. And since this COVID-19 pandemic and the situation with our churches and our folks, there are entities within our higher levels that have rescinded that vote. Now, it's not a broad thing where everyone's doing it, but individual organizations, and I know that my organization has done it, where that for us in the office, we have decided we're not going to move forward with that increase, along with giving money back to the conferences to help them in these times, which would obviously help our local churches. So our church organization as a structure has taken up the mantle of providing additional resources to get to the local level, to make sure that conferences are solving, churches are solving, the situation where churches are asking for interest-only payments are done. It's not enough, but it's something. It's a place to begin with. And I think if our churches, as Pastor Vincent shared, if our members are educated as to what is being done, I believe they will come alongside, shoulder to shoulder, along with what God is doing, and will make enough resources available for us to move through the pandemic and be able to be prepared to deal with the post-pandemic situation.
Good.
Well said. If I may comment on what Anselm just said about the investment in a $7 million state-of-the-art community center rather than a church.
I said 30 million. 30 million.
Understand, first of all, that in order to accomplish that, it begins with a process of education. Most of our members have to be educated to embrace a vision like that, because the average age in our church today is 60 years of age. And the people with the purse strings are 60 years of age and over, a large number of them. And for them to be motivated, they're thinking church first, traditional church first, because traditionally our church has been so anglicized in its mindset that that's all that we think of. Now, my framework again is still our local conference, which is Southeastern. I'm just using that as an example. We have over 50,000 members. 50% are from the Caribbean. 30% are Haitian. 5% Hispanic, and only 15% are African American. And yet the African American communities are the largest people group in all of our cities, from Tampa to Orlando to Miami to Jacksonville, and we are not reaching those communities. Why? Because we have no programs that connect with them. So that what you have in terms of context is, you have churches A that are largely Haitian in their population, and largely West Indian in their population. And the Haitian mindsets and the Caribbean mindsets are not in tune with what Anselm just talked about. In order to get them there, you have got to re-educate them. I'm talking on a personal level now, because that's what I had to do right here in Tampa to get us to that level, and even to create a vision for the clinic. So that's where it starts, with that type of a process, because most Haitians, most people from the Caribbean, they have been anglicized because the missionaries brought us the message, and we transport our religion with us. And so most of us resemble the type of ministry that we have back in Jamaica. And if you look at the church in Canada now, the church in England, and the church in Northeastern, and the church in Greater New York, they're all the same, every last one of them.
I would push that envelope just a
I
little.
said a mouthful there, but I know I said a mouthful there, but it's reality.
Yeah. And listen, I would push that envelope to just a little further, to say not only is it members in the pews that we'd have to educate to pursue something on that level. I have a strong inkling that it's not only at the local membership level that we would run into obstacles. We would have, if a local pastor went to his conference president or to the union or whatever and said, this is something that I want to do, in many cases, that pastor is going to run into some issues even with local leadership. That would either discourage, defund, or denigrate the concept or the idea. And listen, I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to leave it at that. So that education, let's go with that. So that education or that mindset is something that exists in all of the tiers of our organization, that sometimes we don't embrace it because things like that aren't embraced at a certain level. Sometimes that trickles down, and oftentimes people follow suit of leadership.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in the feedback from Mr. Duane Dorshe. You know, we have pastors, talking about the system and how the system, we have to go outside the system to raise funds. And then we talk about being community minded and having the church open more than just, as Pastor Paul said, those 40 hours per month. I believe he said something like that. What's your take on this? Because you are a member, a hardworking member of the church. You are vested in the church, right? And you're hearing us talk about doing things differently. What's your take on this?
Well, I'll tell you, this conversation is so refreshing, and Dr. Vincent's wisdom is so refreshing. At Seabrook, we've gone through several fundraising projects. Most recently, we did over $1 million renovation about a year and a half ago. So I'm very familiar with the process of having to raise money, having to go to the conference and the union to get those funds, not being able to do anything on our own. And it really ties the hands. Not only to do special projects like that, but again, just to do the ministry that we're supposed to be doing in the community. The fact that the vast majority of our funds go back up the chain, and we're left with so little to maintain the local building, plus to do the ministry that we're assigned to do. It's a very challenging environment to work within. And it's good to hear that there's acknowledgement that system doesn't really work today, and that there need to be changes to that system in order to make local ministry more effective.
And with these ideas, and Pastor Vincent, I'll let you comment on this too. And Pastor Paul, anytime you want to just chime in directly. But here's the thing, when you're talking about doing these community ventures, you want your church open to really serve the community. I'm thinking somewhere down the line you're talking about staff, and I believe that there's some churches that have more than just one full-time hire, right? And so you're talking about staffing. You're talking about a whole lot of financial investments that need to be made to make this happen. How do we sustain a vision like that with our current structure? Pastor Vincent?
I can give you a classic example of what we do. Like, for example, we have the Calvary Community Clinic that we operate. The budget is about $250,000-$300,000 a year, and most of that money comes from the community. We pay a full-time executive director to run the clinic on a day-to-day basis, and we pay her about $50,000 to $60,000 a year, and then we have an assistant that we pay to assist her, and we're now the medical home for over 1,500 people in the greater Tampa Bay area. And everything that we do, we give away free medication, free everything. But once you have a program like that in the community, as Dr. Wade said, the community will respond. We don't get a dime from the union or the GC or any of the upper echelons. We have the church that supports it, where we ask each member to give $10 a month, and the rest of the money comes from the community. So that illustrates that once you have the programs that are resident in the community, that the community would respond, as long as it is a bona fide partnership. So what we've done is we've set up a board of directors that's half church members and half community. So we have that community input and that community buy-in. Most of our churches do not embrace the community because they think if we brought community folk into anything that we do, that it would pollute it, tarnish it, compromise it, whatever. But we have found the marriage and the partnership, to work very well for us. So This is where it begins. But understand that this is out of the box. You don't see very many Adventist churches doing this. And in order for change to come in the Adventist church, it has to come from the bottom up. But most of our millennials, which is our brightest hope for change, are so frustrated with the system that they're going outside of the system now. They're leaving our churches and they're joining Sunday churches where the minister comes out with a t-shirt and a blue jeans and says, "Come just like you are," and they're abandoning our churches in droves. And that's because they're frustrated by the bureaucracy. Let me tell you what I'm convinced of. I mean, looking back, and I know that it's a backward perspective is a lot different. And I'm hoping that this is what will happen as a result of this pandemic, that the church will recognize with the use of technology that most of the bureaucratic positions in our churches are not needed. I believe that a church can be run, a conference could be run with a president, a secretary, a treasurer, somebody in human resources, and everybody else. Beyond that is a pastor in the field. There's no need for office, departmental men and conferences anymore. Not with technology. Let me give you an example. What does the Sabbath school director in a conference do all week long? What does he do? Monday to Friday. There's no Sabbath school. On Sabbaths, he can only get to one church. Any training now for Sabbath school teachers, for superintendents, for officers, can be done through Skype, through Zoom. I mean, what do we need these departmental brethren for? We don't. I mean, if we embrace technology, we can wipe out a whole lot of this stuff that is so that in my estimation is what I call tide eaters. They're just eating up the tide, and we can free money to go back into the churches and into the community.
Well, let me just jump in here. I hear what you're saying, Dr. Vincent, and I'm with you. But even as a departmental leader, even if we do away with some of these leadership positions, in having that meeting online, you still have to have somebody to coordinate. There is still some human resource to help lead. One of the biggest resources we have in the church is human resource. It ain't money resource. Our church does not have a money problem. And we fool our members into thinking it's a money problem. It's a resource problem. It's a human problem. It's how we set up systems and how we maintain systems, how we protect systems, how we grow those systems, or how we don't grow those systems is really our biggest problem. But if we are willing to be serious and be honest with ourselves as a church, some of those human situations may need to change, yes, or they have to change in order to move the church forward. I'm very careful in how I say that, but I believe that you made a point. Yes, there are some structural changes that need to happen, but I also think we need to be careful that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Also, I want to say that, yes, we have not been serious about tapping our powerful, most precious resource, which is our youth and young adults. And we need to be able to also make effort to embrace our current youth and young adults that can help move the church forward. Our system just doesn't know how to do that. Our system forces us to look at things in a certain way. But if we change the way our system is structured, we can then begin to incorporate these youth and young adults to help make a difference in how we do church.
Well, and I don't mean to dominate the conversation, but let me just interject this. What frustrates me as a pastor looking back is that over the years, we have been locked into our system. And the system that we have has not worked for us. And we have been delusional and illusional about it. And we are not even open towards developing what I would think would be a sign of progress, a pilot project that would say, well, let us set up something on a trial basis to see if it will work in a conference or in an area of the country, to see if this might work for the future. If we decided to change now, we wouldn't even know what to change to with confidence because we haven't tried anything different. Because we have not even on an experimental basis been open to change. In our denomination, we are still in a typewriter mode in a computer age. We haven't gotten past that yet, and that's where we are. We are actually locked into that. And I hated to bring this conversation up with Dr. Wade because I know sometimes that these brethren that are in certain positions, they get very territorial because they understand that they have to be part of the change. Now, here's my issue. Here's my issue. When the North American division goes into a new building and pays $25 million cash for it, and every church that builds a building struggles and have to raise money, that's a systemic problem right there. That has a problem with the system. That they had that $25 million and God knows how much more set aside of our money. And on this level, we are still struggling. And if this doesn't change, the millennials are going to change it for us. And 25 years from now, this church is not going to be the same church because I don't know how many of you on this call have been talking to these millennials. They think that our financial structure is a game. They really do. It's a game, and they are awake to it. All right, here's what they have said to me, right? Why it is a game.
Talk, Doc. Tell us.
All right. We tell them that you cannot do certain things with the tithe. You can't pay a secretary for your pastor with it. You can't pay your janitor with it. You can't pay your light bill with it. You can't pay anything on the local level with it. The moment the conference gets its money on the tithe, they do everything with it that they tell the church they can't do with it. They pay mortgages with it for the conference and churches that can't afford their mortgages. They pay every secretary in the office with it. They pay the janitor with it. They do everything with it. The light bill, everything. I mean, the copier, everything in there is paid with the tithe. But they tell the church, you can't do that. But once we get it and we put our hands on it, we can do exactly with it what you said you can do with it.
Oh my God.
So now the millennial says now, well, how is that working for you and it can't work for us? And that's where this church is headed in the future.
Doc Vincent, you just put a letter in my mail from my conference president, from my union president, from the GC president, from the division president. We all getting letters now.
I'm speaking truth to power. I'm speaking truth to power.
You speaking nothing but the truth, Doc.
And listen, If they call me, I will hook up 6 millennials on Skype and let them talk to them.
Hey,
Listen, and this is where this church is going to have to change moving forward.
yeah.
I mean, if we're serious about change, because we talk about change, and at the end of the day, it's just a lot of people running their mouths, but there is no real change. And we would rather die than change our methods.
My Lord, my Lord. Well, listen, I
But
think
but
that
I think
go
you
ahead.
said it right. You said it best at the beginning. This COVID-19 pandemic is an opportunity for change, and I believe there is going to be change, and we will see some changes. Georgia just opened up Friday, and they're saying you could have church as long as you're 6 feet apart from each other. You can go to church, and I'm like, at 50%, that's going to be a change for a lot of our churches. Because right now, some churches, they don't even get 25% of their membership. And if you can only get 50% showing up who was showing up, Lord, there will be hardly anybody in church. But I believe there is going to be a change, and we have to be positive about what is to come. Pastor Vincent, I believe you will see a change, not in a sense that we are being forced to do it, but in a sense that we want to see God's message move forward. And COVID-19 is forcing us to look at it differently and how we can make that happen. And I believe that is going to happen.
And to put the resources, man, to put the resources where it's going to bring and maximize the evangelistic potential of our church, because we can no longer evangelize people like C.D. Brooks and E.E. Cleveland and Rainey and McNeely and them used to do with 8 weeks under a tent. We have to find more creative ways of doing that. And that's where it takes resources to do that. Resources, that's where it needs to go. And none of it is going. And what we are doing, we are growing by migration and immigration, but we are not reaching the indigenous population. And the best thing that the missionaries did for us is to go down to the Caribbean and Haiti and start the work. So now that the Haitians and Caribbean people are coming to America, they are the church. But in terms of reaching the North American Anglos as well as African Americans, this church is completely out of touch with the two major groups, people groups in this country. The Anglos, if white people are going to go to heaven, they can't go as Adventists. They got to go as Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterians, but not as Adventists, because the Adventist church does not embrace them. And if African Americans are going, they got to go as Baptists and Methodists. They can't go as Adventists because Adventists are not reaching them either. Right.
Mercy.
Man, we might need to take a break, man. This is a whole lot.
Listen, I'm speaking. Listen, I'm speaking truth to power now. I mean, I will. Maybe y'all won't have me on this after today, but.
No, we want you on it. We want.
Yeah. We go ahead, Doc.
And here's the thing.
Maybe this is too. Maybe this is too radical. Maybe I sound like Bernie Sanders rather than Biden. I don't know what.
No, but you know, I think you are echoing. In fact, I know you're echoing the thoughts of some of the millennials and pastors as well. And in order for us to be effective, we got to get ahead of this thing instead of being forced to do something. You see, when you're forced to do something, then you lose a lot of momentum. You lose a lot of interest and so forth. And so it's best to be ahead of it so that now we understand where we're going and how to plan. We're not saying throw away all the departmental people. No, I don't think anyone is saying that. No. Or throw away all of the things that we're doing as a system, because the system, I think, is not entirely bad. The system is not entirely bad, but we do know that there are some things in this system that we have to reevaluate to be effective. And then the next question, and maybe it's for another time, Pastor Paul, is to figure out how.
Yeah.
We can talk. This is a good conversation. You'll get a lot of hits on Facebook. But how? How? The pilot program sounds good. Or, I mean, how, and so I think that's the type of conversation that not only in this platform we need to have, but other platforms. And hopefully by God's grace, something can be done, because if we don't, I just think that we're going to be in a bad shape as a denomination.
Amen, amen. And hopefully in future conversations, we can talk about some of the ministries that are working. I'm a part of a radio ministry here in the DC area, WGTS, and we're reaching 500,000 unchurched members in the DMV a year. Very powerful ministry that operates independently, but I think is very effective. And so some of the things, some of the lessons that can be learned from that, I think can apply to some of our churches as well.
Well, and absolutely. I was so happy to hear that word on church, because this is where we have lost our sense of mission.
Right.
80% of the people that we bring into our churches now are people who are already Christians that we re-Christianize, Baptists and Methodists that we're making Adventists out of. And we have lost our sense of mission. As a matter of fact, we never had a sense of mission, because what we try to preach is the three angels message, and we preach it at the expense of the gospel. And the gospel is directed to the unchurched, people who have never heard of Jesus Christ. And you have 330 million people in America. Of that 330 million, 250 million are unchained, are unchurched. And yet 80% of the people that we bring in come from those who are already in church, and we have 250 million people out there that have not yet believed and accepted Jesus Christ. And if the energy that we put into bringing people out of Baptists and Methodists into Adventists, if we put that into the unchurched, our churches will grow 4 times as fast. If for no other reason that the energy that we put into making an already church person an Adventist, if we put it into an unchurched person, he doesn't know anything about the Bible, it's easier to introduce him to Christ and make him an Adventist than pouring all of this energy into folk that are already in church, and you got to disabuse their mind of the state of the dead, Sunday keeping, all of that stuff that they're already ingrained in. And here are 250 million people that don't know Jesus. You don't have to spend time doing that. Just teach them the first time. And that's where some of our energy needs to be going.
All right. I'm realizing we got a lot more to talk about.
Amen. Yeah.
We have tickled the bottom of an iceberg. And it's I feel like what we did was we got an iceberg that's like 50 miles wide, and we just threw a match at it in order to try to melt it today. Pastor Vincent, thank you so very much, Dr. Vincent, for your contribution to this discussion today. I know we need to have you back on. We want to talk about Pastor Henry. Dr. Henry brought up that quintessential question. Now we can go on and talk about some of the things that we know or that we all think or theorize need to be done, but then the pragmatic part of how do we make those changes at the local level? How do we educate people's minds? How do we make changes or at the other levels of the structure and of the institution? All of us, I think, on this feed today have heard millennials echo the things that Dr. Vincent shared with us, if we have not echoed them ourselves. So I don't think that's new or that's strange, and yet we kind of pretend like it is. Oh, they said that. Even me, I'm sitting here saying, "Ooh, he said that," when I know good and well that it's being said all around me all the time, and we kind of treat it like it's taboo. But it is the reality, I would suggest, of the majority of our millennials and the generation that will come in taking the reins of this message and moving it forward. And so we've got to put it out there. We've got to have these discussions, and then the discussions have to turn into pragmatic discussions, as Dr. Henry brought out, as to how. What do we do? What do we do about it? Our time is well spent at this point. It is 5:35. Next week we have with us, is going to be with us, Pastor Roger Hernandez. He is the ministerial director for the North American, not for the North American, for the Southern Union. We have Pastor Juan Rodriguez, who is the youth director for the Florida Conference. Both of them are going to be sitting with us tomorrow on next Sabbath. And I saw some questions earlier on in the feed that had to do with those millennials and young people. And so we're going to be tapping into some of the expertise that we have here. Pastor Wade also has spent a lot of his ministry dealing with young people, and this discussion hinges more so on them. Although we know that statistic that we heard today, 60 is that average age. However, if this church is going to survive, we've got to not just engage them in the outcomes. We've got to engage them in the conversations as well. If we're going to make a way for them to be able to take over the reins of the direction of this movement. So again, Duane, we appreciate your presence with us today and your contribution to this discussion. Roger, Wade, Dr. Henry, I'm going to give it to you as you send us out and prepare us for next week, Dr. Henry. And I'm going to play your outro music.
Don't play it too loud.
I'm going to turn it down.
But here's the thing. We definitely appreciate all of the comments that were made, because we want to be effective. That's the bottom line. Jesus is about to come, and we want to be an effective minister for the gospel of Christ. So we want you to be prepared for next week. Next week is going to be a different perspective, because we're getting, some other union people another union person coming, another conference person will be coming. It'll be good to have another retired pastor to come,
yes,
so that we can get a full gamut on the work, right? Because I just believe, and this is just my theory, I just believe that as we talk together, I think that we can grow together. We're not talking about ostracizing a particular group in the church. No, we're talking about how can we work together to make sure that we are effective, so that when Jesus comes, he can say, "Thou good and faithful servant." That's what I want him to say to me, and I know that you want that as well. So again, thank you. By God's grace, let's continue to talk. And I think that the Lord is using this platform to do some mighty things in his kingdom.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for including me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. We're going to see you guys again, same place, same time, next Sabbath afternoon at 4 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. God bless. Have a great afternoon. Dr. Vincent,
all right,
don't go too far. We're going to have you back, because we want to dig a little deeper. So you stay close.
All right. Okay. All right. God bless.